Hey everyone, I'm Mitch. I'm one of the pastors here at Suncrest, and you're watching episode 2 of a series we've been calling Take the L. So, let's get going.
So, this is our question over 3 weeks. What do you do when someone you love or something you love dies? After asking that question last week and sharing some of my own stories from my own life, I ended up in a number of overwhelming conversations last week. They happened in the Commons area after the service. They happened by email days later. They were overwhelming both in number, quantity, and they were overwhelming for the chance to listen to your stories and sit with you in your loss. You know, I told you last week this is a 90-minute message. It's really broken up over 3 weeks, but it's one message from beginning to end. And I joke about not being allowed to do a 90-minute message all at once, but I wouldn't do it if I could. This is the right format to let something unfold in 3 different ways over 3 weeks to let us experience something together. You know, I kind of title each one of the messages. We don't make a big deal of it, but last week's title was White Flag. This week's title is Walking Through. And next week's title is Walking Away. Last week's message was really about feeling. It was the white flag. It was acknowledging the loss has happened. It was not trying to move on too quickly. It's about mourning and crying and sitting. This week, working through, isn't about feeling. It's about thinking. And I'm going to ask you to really think a lot this week, to come to grips with some questions, to really discern particular situations in your life, to reflect about what your next steps might be. And then next week is about moving. It's about stepping into a new season of life, not pretending that the loss didn't happen, but having mourned it and having discerned it, thinking about what's my next step. Last week I told you this is a series about grieving and mourning and lamenting. This is a major theme in the scriptures, and every healthy person does healthy grieving, mourning, and lamenting. This is a series about hoping again. Hope is that flame. Hope that things can be different, that they can be new again, or what gives us the chance to make it through some very dark seasons of our life. It's a reminder that there's a possibility of redemption, but it's only a possibility. Many times after people walk through loss, I see them not experience redemption. Instead, I see them experience a spiraling. Or I see them experience what I call a spin cycle. They get started, but then they go right back. They get started, and then they go right back. Or sometimes they're just stuck in the mud and they feel like they can't move anywhere, but there is the possibility of redemption. And then, of course, it's about what to leave behind and what to take with you. That's one of the 2 significant questions that I'll ask you to reflect on and think about when we're together today. Now, I think that this laying out over the course of 3 weeks is really the perfect way to lay out this format. But I want to acknowledge a couple of things. The idea that we're doing a message series over 3 weeks is not a suggestion to you about how the timing of your mourning or the trajectory of your mourning should take place. I am not pretending at all that this is a 3-week process. And you do it, you need week 1, and then week 2, and week 3, and then you can move on. The 3 weeks is just a picture of the progression. And I don't know exactly, of course, where each of you started or when this will kind of flow in, but it's important that you know. I'm not expecting you to wrap this up next weekend. Maybe even more than that. While it's a nice, clean progression, to feel it and then to think it and then to move on. In real life, it's never that clean. It's never that clean. Sometimes you've started to move on and then the feelings all flood back in again. I processed the grief over my dad a number of years ago and thought I had done so in a pretty healthy way. I think I had done so in a pretty healthy way. And was starting to take some steps forward when one day I went to my bookshelf and I pulled a book off my shelf. It's this book right here. It was a book that my dad gave me. And when I opened it, I realized he had written a note in it that I had never seen before. And I read this note. I'll read it to you. It says, "Greg, no matter what you do, I want you to always know that you can depend on my love. Your mother and I are very pleased with your full-time service to the Lord. Love, Dad." And there wasn't any way, though I was in the process of working through my grief, that when I picked that up and unexpectedly read it in my office, that it wasn't all going to flood back to the hurt and the heartache and the pain and the loss. That's the way grief works. So though this is a 3-week message series, I don't want you to pretend that it will be done in 3 weeks or that it will be that linear. And I also want to acknowledge the limitations of this format. It's wonderful for us to sit in a room and listen to what the scriptures have to say to them. There's tremendous wisdom and experiences that we can have in this room. But by its very nature, this experience is essentially a monologue from me to you. And a lot of times, walking through grief in a healthy way has to be a dialogue. And I'm the biggest fan there is of you taking a step into a relationship with a counselor or with a therapist to be able to kind of white flag it and say, you know what, I'm not figuring this out on my own. I'm struggling, I'm hurting, I'm not figuring out how to move forward. I need to talk to somebody. And we have recommendations, and even if you need it, financial help, because we would love to help you do that. I'm a pastor and a teacher. I'm not a therapist or a counselor, but if you text the word counsel to the number 94,000, we'll just immediately reply to you with a list of recommended counselors in our region, their phone numbers, their contact info, and a way if you need financial help. Because Suncrest, through our Compassion Fund, would love to help people walk through this. So with that in mind, today, I want to lead us through a process of reflecting really on 2 questions. In some ways, this is all set down by a beautiful proverb in Proverbs chapter 4. It says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." That first verse here is the feeling part. It's our heart. And we should guard our heart. We should weep when we need to weep. We should let our heart have a chance to process things, because from our heart, everything else comes. It is the wellspring of life. But too often, when you lose a relationship or you lose a friend or you lose an opportunity, what happens in the heart is it either becomes numb or it becomes hard. And maybe you could even see this in your own losses. That when you went through the divorce, your heart got just numb. You stopped feeling, or it got hard. And if your heart is numb or it is hard, that's where life's going to go. But if you handle this in a healthy way, the heart can be the wellspring into something else. It says, keep your mouth free from perversity. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips. We're going to talk about what to take with you and what to leave behind. Let your eyes look straight ahead and fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths of your feet. And next week, I'm going to ask you to move forward with your feet. But today, is about that careful thought to say, how would I do that? So, 2 questions today. Here's the first one. How do I decide if it's time to take the L? So, this might seem like an odd question to you if we're talking about the literal loss of a loved one, someone who's died. And you think, well, I don't really get to decide that timing. Well, you didn't get to decide the timing of their death, but you do get to decide the timing of when you're going to acknowledge the loss. My mother-in-law and father-in-law live in a small town in Illinois. Years ago, they bought what's actually called the Moncton Mansion. It's in Quincy, Illinois. And it is an enormous house, and it was entirely dilapidated. This house is like 7,000 square feet. It has 9 fireplaces. And my father-in-law is a handyman, loves working on things, and he has restored the whole house. And then he added on to it, and then he put things in the yard and such. He just loves to do that. Of course, my mother-in-law does not love to do it. And one night we were playing cards together, and I said, Larry, what if something happens to you? What's going to happen to this house? And my father-in-law said, if I die, Susie will have a for sale sign in the yard before the funeral. And then my mother-in-law, in a way only she can, spoke up and she said, well, not before the funeral. And I think, well, that's a little bit of an image of how we get to choose our timing on our losses. I see people, when they have a spouse or a child or a friend die, they go clean out the closets that afternoon. That's too quick. And some haven't cleaned out the closets after 5 years. And that's too slow. You and I get to choose when we take the loss and when we're going to step into the process. But it's even more complicated when it's not someone who has died, but it's something that has died. Maybe the opportunity that you had, the dream that you had for what life would be like, for what work would be like, for what the business would be like. Maybe that actually hasn't been realistic for a long time, but you haven't taken the L yet. You haven't acknowledged the loss. The toughest circumstances for these are the relationships in our lives that really matter. They're normally people that we love, people that we are related to. And sometimes we have to decide in these relationships that we feel like should work and where we want love to be present. Is it possible I need to acknowledge the end of that relationship? How do I decide if it's time to take the L? Now, I understand some well-meaning followers of Jesus might be sitting here tonight. You might think, Greg, there's always hope. You should never take the L. You should never move on from a relationship. There's always has to be something. And I think, you should read the Bible. You should follow the life of Jesus. Because in multiple occasions, and I'm going to show you one, Jesus seems to take a different perspective. Jesus at one stage was encouraging his people to go out and share his message, to build some relationships, to take it forward. And this is what he said. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. He says there's a certain gauge when you're paying attention to relationships to say, hey, if you're going for it and you're going for it and you're going for it, but they're not going for it, if you're doing your part and you're doing your part and you're doing your part, but they're not doing their part, if they're not open to it, if they're not welcome to it, actually what you could do is you could spend all of your time and effort working on something that is not going to work. And you could miss out on other opportunities that are there relationally. And so, it at least has to be under consideration That in relationships of our lives, we would shake the dust off our feet and move on. Now, I do say that with some trepidation. It is not the way of a follower of Jesus to just move on from relationship to relationship to relationship. Just go for it. And if you start asking questions like, well, how would you know? How would you know if you're supposed to move on? You might think, well, if it gets hard, you're supposed to move on. But I promise you that is not the answer for followers of Jesus. It is not, if it gets hard, move on. Actually, when it gets hard is a time for followers of Jesus often to lean into the situation, to endure when others wouldn't endure, and be faithful when others couldn't be faithful. And so let me give you a few questions if we think about this to say, hey, when might it be time to move on from a relationship? Question number 1. Did I promise I wouldn't? Did I promise I wouldn't move on from this relationship? Did I take a vow in a wedding ceremony? Did I sign a contract that I need to follow through on? Did I make a promise to an employer or to an employee or whoever it is? If you made the promise that you're going to follow through, then we don't shake the dust off our feet and move on. Our promises really matter. We let our yes be yes and our no be no. And I can appreciate that in some of the situations I just named, it's extraordinarily complicated. And the scriptures do help us with that. Take the marriage example. The scriptures don't want a vow to come to an end. According to the scriptures, a man and a woman get married and two become one. It's not just walking away, it's untangling and separating. But the scriptures say, if someone's committed adultery against you, if someone's abusing you, if someone's abandoned you, they walked away, then there is room to bring it to an end. These are very important things for us to discern. And there are judgment calls that come with Christian conviction about keeping our promises. About when I said for better or worse, I didn't just mean for better. I actually meant that we'd stay together when it's worse too. You don't walk away from relationships flippantly. That's not what I'm saying. Second question. In a relationship, will they do their part? You might be thinking about your uncle or your brother or your daughter. I don't know who's in your mind right now, but you're thinking, I'm not quite sure what to do with this relationship. And one of the tests of that relationship is to say, well, will they do their part? You know, we use a framework at Suncrest all the time. It's helped hundreds of people to think, when you're facing a situation, you have to step back and kind of define, well, what is my part? What is God's part in this situation? And what is their part? And if you can kind of scratch that out, as you discern this, you can say, well, my part is my responsibility. I better step up to it. But some people overfunction. And instead of just doing your part, you try to do God's part too. Or instead of just doing your part, you do their part for them. And it's a fair question to say, well, are they doing their part? If they're not, maybe it's time to shake the dust off your feet and move on. Let me give it then this question. Is there a legitimate burden in their life? Something they could not be expected to carry on their own. And you and I, if you are a follower of Jesus, you and I who are the followers of Jesus, we have a commission in our lives. That man, if someone's making choices that are selfish and hurting me and my family, whatever, maybe I need to shake the dust off. But if someone's sick, if it's a disease, if it's something they can't, it's not in their ability to handle it, then do not walk away from them. This might be the most golden part of the message for some of you who are wrestling through relationships that are in your life, but many times I've taught from the passage of Galatians 6 to help people discern when it's our responsibility to stay in a relationship with somebody we love and when it's not. Galatians chapter 6, I kind of condensed it here, but this is kind of the opening verses of Galatians chapter 6. It just says this: carry each other's burdens, and in this way you'll fulfill the law of Christ. For each one should carry their own load. A man reaps what he sows. Now, there's images around these words, and I want to give you the images here today that I think will be helpful to you. And you're discerning, man, I'm in a relationship, and I'm not sure if I should stay or if I should shake the dust off my feet. The scriptures say, carry each other's burdens. What is a burden? Well, my image of a burden I brought with me today, this is a boulder, right? Can I carry this boulder? I can't for about 5 seconds. But if I had to go through my life and write sermons and lead staff meetings and raise kids and be a good husband while I was carrying this, it would be impossible. And some people that you love, your uncle, your brother-in-law, your daughter, have a burden they have no hope of carrying on their own. They can't function in life while they carry that burden. I mean, it's one of the most distasteful, disdainful things that you've ever seen, isn't it? When someone's diagnosed with cancer and someone leaves them. How do you do that? So in a situation where someone has a burden, a boulder, that they can't carry on their own, this is the law of Christ. This is what Jesus did for us. He did for things for us we couldn't do for ourselves. However, not everything's a burden. Not everything's a boulder. He says, for each one should carry their own load. So I brought my backpack. This backpack, is like, I could do my stuff carrying this backpack. This is my load. We each decide what loads to take on. You become a parent, you decide you got the load of raising kids. You step into a job, you need to be able to handle that job. Tough things come in life, and some of those we handle ourselves. Each one of us has a backpack, right? Not every one of us has a boulder. And you need to carry your backpack, and I need to carry my backpack. Each one should carry their own load. Like, if you don't have a job, but you could have a job, and you want me to give you money, even though you could have a job, that's helping no one. Because that's your load. And the scriptures say each one should carry their own load. It actually says a man reaps what he sows. That the natural consequences of life are one of the great images to help us see when should we step in. The scriptures say things like, if a man will not work, he should not eat. And maybe you think that's rude. The scriptures say, no, that's everybody's load. And of course, this is where in the relationships of our life, especially when love and emotion and potentially guilt and regret and things like that start to weigh in. If you find yourself helping carry someone's burden, God bless you. You're fulfilling the love of Christ, the law of Christ. But if you're carrying someone else's backpack, just because they don't want to carry it, because they can choose not to carry it, because they can get away with not carrying it, since you're carrying it, the scriptures would say, maybe you ought to shake the dust off your feet. I mean, this shows up in all kinds of ways, right? And I'm not trying to be critical of you. I'm trying to give you examples to really help you see. If you have a teenager at home and you're getting them out of bed every morning and you're frustrated, surely you're frustrated if you're getting them out of bed every morning and it's making you angry. You're like, this isn't right. But you do it again tomorrow morning. Then it's worth asking the question, what should the object of your frustration be? I'm not trying to be flippant about it. I know there are difficult situations. People ask me all the time, Greg, my son, my brother-in-law, my uncle, he's been through hell. and he needs a place to come, and we're thinking about opening our home to him, that he could move in. Should we do it? And I always say, well, is the burden too big for him to bear right now? Man, if it is, and you're a follower of Jesus, I'd really encourage you to give of yourself, to use your own money, to do those sorts of things, to help somebody who could not carry it themselves. You also might want to set up on the front end of that arrangement to say, hey, we're going to do this, and it's going to be for 3 months, or it's going to be for 5 months, it's going to be for 6 months. And we want to help you get back on your feet. And in the first 2 months, eat our food, use our electricity, take a break, rest, okay. And in the next 2 months, it's time to go out there and get a job. And actually at 6 months, we need you to move out. And then people ask me, yeah, Greg, but what do you do at 6 months if they're still just eating your food and using your electricity? And I'd say, well, what did you tell them you were going to do? You told them they need to move out. Perhaps you need to shake the dust off your feet. Or you need to shake the dust off their feet. Now, this is hard. If you care, it's hard. But these are the decisions about taking the loss. To say, is it just time to call it? Ring the bell, tap out. Say, this can't keep going. Now, some of those illustrations start to feel like, well, the first move is to kick someone out of your life. But let me rewind that just a little bit, to discern, to think today about what you might need to move on from. Let me give you 4 options. You might just need to move on from a feeling. Maybe you don't need to kick them out. One of the richest conversations and most difficult conversations I had last week resulted in a couple telling me about the death of their son. And he said, I've learned to not feel guilt, but to feel regret. I'm like, wow. Because maybe the loss you need to take is to say the guilt has to come to an end. You got to move on from a feeling, and you could get to a new place. Sometimes you have to move on from a focus. Lots of times in relationships, we want to persuade people to see the world the way that we see it, to think the way that we think. And it's a goal of our lives to bring them into alignment with us. And when I say move on from a focus, I'm saying you don't need to end your marriage, but you might need to stop talking about that thing, that theme. I know you wanted to become a Republican or you wanted to become a Democrat. It becomes the angst of your marriage. I would just take the L on that. I know you want them to see the world your way. I know you're raising kids together and there has to be some sense of unity, but at some point it's arguing, the fight. You got to move on from the fight. You have to make a decision and take the L. Like, you don't get your way every time. Probably at the center of things for many of us, it's like, actually the theme is about my faith. I want them to become a follower of Jesus. I'm so intense. It bothers me so much that they're not a follower of Jesus. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but sometimes people who aren't followers of Jesus get annoyed by followers of Jesus because you're relentless and you're not paying attention. And you think, Greg, could I actually move on from conversations about faith with someone that I love? And I say to you, Jesus' encouragement was about conversations of faith. Shake the dust off your feet. Move on. Maybe it'll come back around someday. Maybe something will happen in their life and it surfaces the occasion again. Maybe this is actually someone else needs to come into their life instead of you. But you're relentless, banging your head against the wall in that relationship. It's time to just move on from the focus. You don't have to move on from the person. Just let the subject go. Sometimes it's moving on from a function. This is the idea of getting someone out of bed who could get themselves out of bed. Just stop getting them out of bed. Take the L. Let a man reap what he sows. Doing things for other people that they ought to be doing for themselves is not helping. It's not helping. It's hurting. It's undermining their self-respect. I know it's hard. I've been in this situation. I've failed at this hundreds of times. But it doesn't make it any less true just because I failed at it. And sometimes you do need to move on from the fool. I use the fool here in the biblical sense of the definition of fool. I don't know if you know this, but the scriptures talk about a wise person being someone who understands that yesterday's decisions are connected to today's consequences, and that today's decisions are connected to tomorrow's consequences. A wise person understands the relationship between cause and effect, between reaping and sowing. The definition of a fool is someone who does not get that. Someone who doesn't learn from their mistake. The scriptures say, the fool returns to his vomit like a dog. And if someone will not learn, will not grow, and especially if it's causing a price to be paid within your life, your family's life, other people you're responsible for, perhaps it's time to shake the dust off your feet. I'm not pretending that isn't hard. But I think there's some discerning and some reflecting and some thinking that with the Spirit of God in your life, you might reach conclusions to say it's actually time to draw this to an end. And you will mourn it. It will be sad. But it is right. Second question is, what should I leave behind? And what should I take with me? What should I leave behind and what should I take with me? And this is really the question for next week. When we're together next week, I'm going to ask you, just kind of jot yourself some notes to what it will be that you will leave behind and what it will be that you will take with you. I'm going to give you some guidance from the scriptures before I go here, but let me give you just a few examples. Last week, one of my examples that I shared was that for those of you who are on a second marriage, sometimes your husband or your wife is paying a price, not for something they did, but something that your first husband or your first wife did. And the reason they're paying the price for it is because you never went through the process to decide, I have to leave that behind. That was about them. That's not about him. I talked to some families this week who are raising teenagers. And I thought this was quite articulate. They started to say, you know what? I think what I'm mourning is that they're not children anymore. But if you try to raise teenagers like you raise a child, if you use the same techniques and the same mechanisms and the same type of relationship, because that's what you're carrying through, you never mourned that their childhood was done and now they're in a new phase of life. And so you keep doing the things you did with a child, with a teenager. If you don't do that, they're going to pay the price. You might be an employee or you might be a boss. And if you're an employee who got fired at your last place, you potentially walk in, you are gun shy in the new place, but the new place doesn't deserve that. Or maybe you're the boss who had to fire the last guy, and now there's a new guy. But guess what? The new guy is paying the price for the last guy. And even when someone dies, we sometimes just carry things we shouldn't carry forward from that. You guys are aware that generational cycles are a real thing. If your grandfather was an alcoholic and your dad was an alcoholic, you might be really, really mad that he was an alcoholic, but the chances that you're going to become an alcoholic have skyrocketed. Why? Because somebody never paused to decide, this is what I'm leaving behind. And this is what I'm taking with me. So I'm going to give you 2 passages to guide this. I'll include these in my email this coming week. They're also in the notes that are in the app if this is helpful to you. But I'm going to ask you to come back next week having thought about this. What do you leave behind? Well, things like bitterness and rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. What happened in your life, that loss, it probably made you angry. Fair enough. Taking the loss means I don't carry that anger home with me. I don't carry that anger to my next relationship. I don't carry it there. Bitterness, is there anything worse than bitterness? If you're a bitter person, nobody can win with you. It's a horrible place to be for the people who are around you. And so you have to go through a process that says, man, I'm mad. I'm even a little bitter. My son should have lived, whatever the situation. But you have to walk away from that before you move on. What would you carry with you? Well, the scriptures say to clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. This, of course, is the opposite of anger and malice and bitterness. It's a sense in which I could step in to what's next. Some of the people who are doing the greatest compassion work on planet Earth right now are people who were victims themselves previously, and they took the pain of what happened to them, the loss of their innocence, and instead of channeling it with anger and bitterness, they channeled it toward compassion to help the next group of people. It's possible that your greatest point of pain is the exact calling of God on your life to work with others who have experienced the same. That's when the bitterness melts into gentleness. We bear with each other. We forgive and put on love. We let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. Peace. You want to step into what's next in a healthy way? Let the peace of Christ be what you make sure you take with you. And be thankful. The loss is sad, but the memories and the legacy and the beauty of what you once had, it may have very well been more than you deserved. That's how I feel about my dad. It was more than I ever deserved. How could I be anything but grateful? And to name the things I'm grateful for, to say, oh my goodness, thank God that I got to experience that. It sets you in a place to move forward. So, I hope you'll join us next week. Would you stand with me right now? Then we're going to go. God, thanks for your goodness, for your wisdom, for truths that are hard, and the freedom we experience because the truth sets us free. Guide us this week to think about what we would leave behind and what we would carry forward. In Jesus' name, amen.
If you or someone you need is in need of help with counseling, whether that's finding resources, getting connected, or honestly, maybe you just need help in general getting counseling because of losses you're dealing with, if that's you, I want you to text the word counsel to 94,000. Someone on our team will send you back a list of resources and opportunities where you can get connected with a licensed professional who can help you take next steps and what it looks like for you to process your losses in healthy ways. So, text COUNSEL to 94,000.
Darkness run for cover, but the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders, I have resurrection power. Still the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. Oh, my praise belongs to you forever. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Oh, our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'm justified. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
Every week, we pause everything we do, both in person and on demand, to focus on the love of Jesus during a time we call communion. It's where in person we take bread and juice, but online and on demand, go ahead and find whatever food and drink you have readily available. We use this time to help recenter and refuel and refocus us on the mission and love of Jesus and our mission here at Suncrest, to be used by God to change lives. Maybe you're watching this And you wouldn't define yourself as someone who follows Jesus. And if that's you, I'm glad you made it to this part of the video. I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on what you've heard so far and be open to the idea that God himself is trying to get your attention. So I'm going to put a timer and some scripture here on the screen shortly. And if you're going to take communion, eat and drink when you're ready. And if you're just reflect on what you've heard so far today. Thanks for checking out episode 2 of Take the L. I hope it's been meaningful for you. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone who needs to hear this, go ahead and hit the share button on Facebook or YouTube. And if you want more content from Suncrest Church, go ahead and hit subscribe on our YouTube channel. I hope you join us next week as we wrap this series up and as we continue to see change happen here. Bye now.